The deck plating was not merely cold. It was a thief of heat. A flat metallic mouth clamped over Stella Diaz's knees as the cutter lurched hard enough to throw a wrench rack sideways and wake every bruise he had collected across 20 years of border work. Red, white, red emergency strobes pulsed through the maintenance bay, slicing the cramped compartment into frames of color. His patched gray coveralls, the black grease under his nails, the orange warning paint flaking from conduit housings that had been old when he first signed on. The alarm tone warbled once, dropped a half step, then climbed again in a pattern he had never heard in drill and never wanted to hear in orbit. The scratching sound came from the coolant conduit above him. It was not a rattle from loose brackets. It was not thermal expansion tapping at seam stress. It was deliberate, arrhythmic, close, like hooked metal dragged across a ceramic plate, and then paused to listen. Stella froze for one heartbeat, then deliberately unlocked his jaw. Panic burned oxygen. Panic burned judgment. He had learned that in a war corridor where people died from bad breathing before they died from bad luck. He laid his left palm flat on the deck, felt the vibration profile through steel, and started the old ritual under his breath before his thoughts could stampede. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. The words sounded small under the alarm, but rhythm mattered more than volume. He counted again, shoulders lowering by fractions, then slid his fingers along the underside of the control lip until he found the manual override by touch alone. His right thumb was still numb from climbing a frozen external truss 2 hours earlier, and numbness made people clumsy. He compensated with procedure. 1. Isolate bay feed. 2. Suppress inspection net. 3. Hard link life support. 4. Verify no fuel leak. 5. Verify no. The cutter shuddered again, a deeper impact this time, as if something massive had leaned on the hull and considered whether to keep pressing. Somewhere aft, a bulkhead lock slammed shut with a sound like a dropped coffin lid. His wrist slate vibrated twice against his sleeve seam. He almost ignored it. Then he saw the top line on the translucent strip and swore once, quietly, like a man who knew profanity did nothing to improve machinery, but used it anyway for emotional lubrication. Retirement transfer. Order. Effective upon docking. Role. Reassignment. Orbital scrapyard. Arbitration. Civilian dispute. Channel 6. Hazard. Authorization. Revoked pending debrief. He stared at the text for a beat too long while red light crossed his face like a scanner bar. 42 years old. 17 in uniform. The last 5 in maintenance because command had decided his talent for surviving kinetic chaos made him ideal for fixing what kinetic chaos broke. His final border sweep was supposed to end with a bad cup of station coffee, a checklist sign-off, and maybe one sarcastic handshake from the watch commander. Instead, he got a screaming bay, a live anomaly in a pipe map that should have been sterile, and a sterile notice telling him to go argue salvage ownership with men who wore polished shoes. Timing, he muttered. Truly elegant. The bay speaker crackled. Chief Diaz, report anomaly status, said Ensign Rook from the bridge, voice clipped and too young for that much authority. Stella kept his eyes on the conduit. Unknown organic adjacent noise in coolant line C9 through C12. Inspection net is misfiring and trying to classify itself as hostile debris. If you want me to lie, I can call it a software mood. A pause. Then, did you say organic? I said unknown. Don't promote it to a lawsuit before I open a panel. Another scrape in the conduit, longer now, then silence. The silence was worse. It made every system noise stand out in layers. Circulation fans, relay ticks, the distant hiss of pressure seals compensating for micro-leakage. Under that, he caught a faint sweetness, cutting through hot metal and ozone. Something musky and animal and profoundly misplaced in a military lane that smelled of solvents and discipline. He did not look up at the camera dome. He knew exactly who would be watching feed now. Bridge officers from Predator-majority houses with rank scent markers in their collars, Marines with bloodline insignia etched into shoulder plates, and one human maintenance chief in scuffed boots, everyone trusted to keep their ship breathing, but few invited into their private briefings. Social geometry in this sector was straightforward in the way knives were straightforward. If an undocumented passenger appeared aboard a patrol cutter, station law said seizure, detention, inquiry. Unwritten practice said, if a human touched noble contraband, presume theft first and ask careful questions after paperwork was complete and careers were already ash. His slate vibrated again, this time with a dockside legal bulletin auto-forwarded to all command channels. Station Accord 88B. Undocumented persons discovered in transit corridors required immediate reporting to nearest enforcement corvette. Failure to report incurred criminal negligence penalties and forfeiture of retirement benefits. Of course, he said to no one. He pushed up from the deck, knees complaining, and reached for the junction box. The latch resisted for half a second before surrendering, and warm, coolant vapor gusted over his hands. He brought up a handheld diagnostic wafer, patch-cabled it to the line, and watched thermal overlays bloom into being. Most of the conduit glowed in expected gradients, amber, orange, steady flow. Then, a small moving flare slid through the map between two baffles where no body larger than a rat-sized maintenance drone should fit. Not rat-sized, larger, warmer. Pausing whenever the alarm peaked, moving when the tone dipped as if it understood cadence. Bridge, he said, tone flattening into procedure. I'm cutting power to inspection net grid B. It's cross-feeding false positives into security and choking my map. Denied, Rook said instantly. Security protocol requires visual lock before net suppression. Security protocol also requires oxygen above 19% in confined maintenance spaces, Stella replied. He tapped his slate and threw her his local air readings. I'm at 17.8 and falling because your net is drawing from auxiliary circulation. Deny me again and write your own incident report. 3 seconds of static silence. Then, tight. Approved. 90-second window. He smiled without humor. Bureaucracy moved fastest when it smelled liability. He toggled manual suppression. The bay lights flickered once, dimmed, then steadied to emergency low. The alarm tone changed timbre. Less shriek now, more mechanical pulse. With the net offline, his map cleared. The thermal flare dropped through a vertical run and stopped near the aft cargo spine. Cargo hold 9. Every muscle in his back tightened on reflex. Hold 9 carried bonded crates from treaty lanes, medical kits, archival drives, diplomatic parcels with seals he wasn't paid to read. Also empty transit bays where stowaways hid when they believed maintenance crews were blind and command crews were predictable. The scraping in the conduit stopped. In its place came a soft thud from behind the aft bulkhead, then another, then the unmistakable metallic clink of someone or something touching a restraint collar against crate edge. Bridge, he said, go. Thermal anomaly relocated to cargo hold 9. Possible stowaway, possible injured. I need corridor cams and atmospheric profile. We're pulling feeds now, Rook said. Her voice had changed. The academy crispness was still there, but fear had entered around the edges. Chief, enforcement corvette has pinged our transponder. They're requesting immediate handoff authority under custodial protocol. The channel clipped for a fraction of a second, as if the ship itself had bitten down on the transmission. "Repeat last," Stella said. "Custodial Protocol 17, she finished, each word distinct. "They're overriding Q and moving to latch." Stella stared at the dark mouth of the service corridor leading aft, then looked down at the retirement order, still glowing on his wrist like a bureaucratic joke written in ice. Hazard duty revoked pending debrief. He barked a short laugh that had no joy in it and plenty of disbelief. "Tell them to take a number," he said. "I'm still breathing, so I still work." He shoved tools into his belt in practiced sequence. Insulated driver, portable scanner, med patch roll, restraint key that fit 6 generations of bad design and none of the new lock's command kept promising. Then he snapped a utility lamp onto his collar, killed the bay mains entirely, and stepped into the corridor where the air ran colder and the ship's pulse lived in the walls. The portside cutter, Kestrel 9 by registry and the Bucket by anyone who had ever replaced her seals, trembled around him as if deciding whether to hold together from habit or spite. Condensation beaded on conduit ribs overhead, catching his lamp beam in a chain of bright points that looked, for one disorienting second, like watchful eyes. The deck under his boots shifted with each course correction from the bridge, small lateral nudges as the pilot tried to keep distance from whatever enforcement vessel was crowding their lane. He kept moving. At the first intersection, he crouched, touched 2 fingers to the plating, and listened through bone. A faint vibration answered from ahead. Not engine, not ventilation. Heartbeat cadence, maybe. Or the memory of one from years ago, when he had done this in different corridors with live rounds instead of wrench kits. He shut that memory down before it could bloom teeth, counted another breath cycle, and rose. Behind him, somewhere near midship, a lock engaged with a heavy hydraulic clunk. Not the sound of safety, the sound of a system deciding options on his behalf. "Chief," Rook said in his ear, breathless now. "Corvette just hard-linked our command channel. They've filed emergency impound under 17. Do you copy?" "I copy." "Orders?" He reached the final pressure door before cargo hold 9. Frost rhymed the seam where warm interior air met coolant bleed from the adjacent line. Beyond it, through steel and insulation, came a new scent. Richer now. Ionized dust, cinched fabric, and fur musk threaded with something copper-bright and humanly recognizable as pain. His hand settled on the manual wheel. "Keep them talking," he said. Then he broke the seal and turned the lock. The wheel resisted with a gritty drag, then gave all at once, and the pressure doors swung inward on a sigh of colder air that smelled of ozone, wet insulation, and frightened animal. Stella did not step through immediately. He planted one boot against the threshold, raised his scanner first, and let the beam sweep left to right across stacked med crates, tie-down chains, and a spill of silver packing foam drifting in low gravity like dead snow. No movement at deck level. No immediate heat signatures bigger than a service drone. The anomaly had either moved, hidden, or learned how to sit very still. He closed his eyes for half a second and reset his breathing count. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. The same cadence he had used in hull breaches and field hospitals and one cratered outpost where alarms had sounded until the speakers melted. His heart rate eased from sprint to hard march. That mattered. A fast pulse narrowed options. A controlled pulse let him see them. "Bridge, hold comms open," he said quietly. "No broad channel alerts. Keep this internal until I call it." Rook answered at once, voice tinny through interference. "Internal only. Security team is requesting entry authorization." Denied for now. On what authority? On maintenance authority, and the fact this hold still has an unresolved atmospheric fault. He glanced at the panel by the door, watched oxygen climb from 17.8 to 18.3 now that the inspection net was offline. If they rush in hot with shock batons, we get panic, hypoxia, and a broken cargo manifest. Tell them I'm preserving evidence. A short pause carried all the weight of rank and youth colliding. Then she said, "Copy. They're not happy. Add it to their memoirs." He ducked through the doorway and pulled the pressure door half shut behind him, not locking it, just narrowing the gap so corridor noise dropped to a distant metallic heartbeat. Inside hold 9, the cutter felt older than it did anywhere else. Weld seams sweated. Deck paint had worn down to bare steel in arcs where cargo skids had bitten over decades. Emergency strips along the floor glowed a jaundiced amber instead of proper white, turning every shadow thick. A narrow plume of coolant vapor leaked from a hairline crack near the aft conduit manifold and crawled low across the deck like cautious fog. He crouched by the nearest crate and touched 2 fingers to the frost gathering on its edge. Real. Recent. Not a sensor ghost. His scanner showed a fluctuating thermal bloom tucked behind the second row of med containers, body-sized but irregular, as if part of it was shielded by foil weave or damped by pharmaceutical gel packs. He zoomed, adjusted gain, and caught one clear detail. 2 bright points high on the silhouette, symmetrical, pointed. Ears. Stella exhaled slowly through his nose and kept his hands visible at chest height, palms open, wrench-clipped but unreachable without obvious motion. "Whoever's back there," he said, pitching his voice low and even, "this compartment is under unstable pressure control and half the ship is trying to make bad decisions about you. I'm maintenance. I can keep air flowing. I can also leave. Your choice starts with whether you want me here." No answer came, but he heard the tiny shift of weight against crate plastic, then the faint metallic tick of something hard touching deck plating. A restraint ring, he guessed. The sound was too light for shackles, too deliberate for loose cargo. His slate vibrated with an incoming legal prompt before he could speak again. "Emergency. Impound. Notice. Custodial Protocol 17. Compliance window 0 hours 10 minutes 44 seconds. He dismissed it and it reappeared instantly, this time with penalty language in bold red. "Obstruction. May void benefits and retroactive pension credits." He barked a dry laugh under his breath. "There's the carrot." From behind the crates, a voice cut through the hold, low, strained, unmistakably female and sharpened by command training. "If you surrender me to 17, Chief Diaz, your pension will outlive your conscience." Stella went still. She knew his name. That narrowed possibilities in a way he did not like. He shifted 1 step right to widen his angle and finally saw her through a triangular gap between crates. Foxkin, tall even in a crouch, one shoulder braced against a med case, field mantle torn and dark at the flank where fur clumped around a treated wound. Ceremonial earrings caught the amber light with each shallow breath. Her wrists were bound by a compact restraint rig, projecting a blue seal he recognized from training briefs nobody at his pay grade was supposed to need in practice. Ducal crestwork sat on the lock, housing like a threat wrapped in filigree. He did not stare. Predatory species read eye contact as challenge, pity, or prey appraisal depending on context and scent. He settled for a respectful focus on the restraint unit instead. "You have my full attention," he said. "I'm not promising outcomes yet." "Reasonable." Her voice tightened at the edges as pain pushed through discipline. "How long until they board?" He checked the notice without looking away from her line of sight. 10 minutes, maybe less if they decide procedure is optional. They often do. That almost sounded like humor, except nothing in the hold was funny. Stella set his scanner down slowly, then unclipped a compact med-patch roll and nudged it forward with his boot, so it slid within reach but not close enough to feel like pressure. I'm reading blood loss trend, not catastrophic but trending wrong. Patch kit. Use it if you haven't. I have. She raised one bound wrist a few centimeters. The restraint housing flashed again. The lock interferes with autodispensers. 17 prefers manageable subjects. There it was. The social map he had expected and still resented. Noble bloodline treated as legal asset, military custody disguised as care, and every channel around him wired to assume compliance equals safety. He had spent years patching ships built on that same logic, where redundant systems existed for hardware and almost never for people. Rook came back on comm, words clipped by stress. Chief, update. Corvette has attached to our dorsal clamp. They're requesting direct visual confirmation from your body cam. He muted outbound audio for 2 seconds and looked at the Foxkin woman. You want your name spoken on open channel? Her ears angled back, then forward again. A quick calculation. No. Not until I control the frame. Copy that. He unmuted. Bridge. Body cam feed is contaminated by coolant, particulate, and low light artifacting. If command wants clean visuals, they can send optics tech and an apology. Stella. Rook stopped herself, corrected. Chief, they're invoking command override. Then log this precisely. Maintenance reports unresolved atmospheric hazard and unidentified injured passenger under triage. Entry by armed team increases casualty risk. He paused, choosing each word like he was soldering a live line. Log it now with my timestamp. Logged. Good. Push it to civilian review queue. A sharp inhale hissed through her mic. That queue is 6 hours behind. Today it isn't. Send it. He ended transmission before she could argue and pulled a portable atmosphere sniffer from his belt. The display confirmed what his lungs already knew. Oxygen recovering slowly. Coolant aerosols high. Sedative residues present in trace amounts near the crate cluster. He angled the device so the Foxkin could see. You were dosed recently. Her mouth thinned, revealing a hint of fang. Transport compliance cocktail. Intermittent. Enough to blunt reflexes. Not enough to produce visible impairment during formal appearances. Convenient. For everyone except the subject. He nodded once. Social threat mapping settled to a harder shape. Environmental hazards he could measure. Air mix, temperature gradients, line pressure, boarding vectors. Institutional hazards were slipperier but no less concrete. An impound protocol with emergency powers, a human maintenance chief with thin legal insulation, a high-status detainee whose own credentials could be used against her if presented through the wrong channel. The crux was no longer whether there was a stowaway. The crux was who got to define what she was. From beyond the half-shut door came a heavy magnetic thunk that traveled through deck plating into his ankles. Boarding collar lock. The Corvette had finished mating clamps. Another sound followed, this one sharper. Marines testing the hatch from the quarter side and finding it on manual hold. Chief Diaz, an unfamiliar voice boomed over local ship speakers, formal and amplified. By authority of Custodial Protocol 17, relinquish compartment control and stand clear. Non-compliance constitutes interference. Stella looked at the Foxkin Duchess, saw the minute tremor in her left hand, saw her force it still. Fear, yes, but not helplessness. More like someone measuring blast radius. He keyed his mic to local only. Name? Soraya Val, she said. Duchess of Halenverge, third signatory line. The title landed like dropped metal. That level of bloodline turned minor incidents into sector hearings. It also explained the speed of the impound and the aggressive legal language. He felt the retirement notice burn phantom hot against his wrist. An entire planned future suddenly balanced against a door wheel in 10 minutes of procedure. Duchess, he said, careful and plain. I can't fight a Corvette with a toolbox. I can, however, force process. Her gaze sharpened. You understand accord review triggers? I understand old ships and older laws. Sometimes that's the same skill set. Outside, the amplified voice repeated the demand, this time with countdown markers. Compartment release in 30 seconds. Stella's hands moved before doubt could congeal. He crossed to the wall panel beside the door and popped the maintenance fascia with his insulated driver, exposing a tangle of color-coded fibers and a dusty manual bus nobody in command used because it required kneeling and patience. He clipped his scanner lead into the diagnostic port, overrode auto-authentication, and opened the emergency services matrix that sat beneath security menus like a trapdoor under expensive carpet. Soraya watched him, breathing shallow, but steadier now. What are you doing? Mapping every system that can kill us by accident while the legal machine tries to kill us by protocol. He toggled 3 valves on screen. First, I route life support away from command priorities so nobody can throttle this hold to force compliance. Second, I flag a contamination vector in medical cargo seals. Third, the outer hatch boomed once as someone struck it with a breaching ram and got only a warning tone for their trouble. Third, he finished, I file a ship-wide biohazard integrity audit. She went very still, then gave a small, incredulous sound that might have been a laugh if her flank had not been bleeding through the patch. That compels open civilian oversight and freezes sealed custody transfers until audit closure, Stella said, at least on paper. Paper is enough if the right people are watching. In this sector, the right people usually show up late. Then we keep breathing until they arrive. The countdown outside hit 10. Stella entered the final confirmation code, felt his pulse in his fingertips, and ran one more breath cycle because hands shook less when lungs obeyed. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. He pressed execute. Across the hold, warning strips shifted from amber to sterile blue as audit mode propagated through the cutter. A new chime rolled through internal speakers, cool and bureaucratic, followed by the automated announcement in 3 languages. Biohazard integrity audit initiated. All enforcement actions subject to civilian transparency clause, pending validation. Silence followed from the corridor, brief and stunned. Then every comm channel on his slate exploded with incoming demands. Legal citations stacking so fast the text blurred into a single red block. Command override requests, enforcement warnings, pension forfeiture notices written in the polished language of institutions that preferred obedience to comprehension. Stella swiped once, hard, and dumped all non-essential traffic into archive. The hold dropped back into the sounds that mattered. Coolant hiss, fan rattle, Soraya's controlled breathing, the faint scrape of marine boots outside the sealed hatch as boarding teams recalculated their script. The speaker crackled. The amplified Corvette officer returned, now careful, the tone of a predator testing an electric fence. Maintenance Chief Stella Diaz, you have initiated a fraudulent audit under false contamination flags. Release cargo hold 9 and submit for restraint. Stella did not answer immediately. He kept his eyes on the open maintenance panel, watching the audit propagate tree by tree through subsystems older than half, the officers shouting at him. Seals green, environmental routing green, civilian transparency relay, yellow, then green. He had one narrow corridor left before someone with higher key authority tried to rip the whole thing out by the roots. Behind him, Soraya shifted, a rustle of torn mantle against crate plastic. "They will attempt a wartime exemption," she said, voice low. "They always do, when a process they do not control becomes visible." Stella risked a glance over his shoulder. Up close, fear did not make her smaller. It made her sharper. Her ears were upright now despite fatigue, tracking every speaker crackle and bulkhead vibration. She had the stillness of a stalking animal and the exhausted eyes of someone who had not trusted sleep in months. "Then we move first," he said. He keyed the mic. "Corvette Command, this is Chief Diaz. Audit packet is live and mirrored to station civilian queue under Accord Transparency Clause. If you force entry before neutral review, your breach logs publish with your transponder signature attached. You want that on your record, you do you." A beat of static. Another voice cut in. Different accent, colder diction. "Chief Diaz, this is Adjudicator Node Kelt attached to Protocol 17 enforcement. You are currently in possession of restricted dynastic property. Clarify intent. Property, not person." The word hit like metal in the teeth. Stella leaned his shoulder into the panel frame and spoke with deliberate flatness. "My intent is to keep an injured passenger breathing in a contaminated compartment while lawful review runs. You can parse nouns later." He muted again. Soraya watched him with a look that was no longer mere assessment. It was something more complicated, respect braided with caution, as if she was testing whether this human mechanic was brave, reckless, or simply too stubborn to know when systems won. "Chief," she said, "if they identify me by biometric trace before I declare status, they can still frame this as retrieval of compromised assets." He nodded once. "Then we control the first declaration." Her ears angled toward him. "You are aware what that costs you. Retirement already sent me to argue scrap ownership in a dead orbit. My cost-benefit analysis is flexible tonight." For the first time, the edge of her mouth moved. Not a smile exactly, more like surprise trying on the shape of one. Outside, a magnet clamp groaned as the Corvette shifted load against the cutter's dorsal spine. The deck shivered beneath Stella's boots. He dropped to one knee beside the panel and rewired a secondary line, isolating command channel authentication through a sacrificial diagnostic loop. Crude, temporary, effective. It would burn out in maybe 12 minutes and take half his access privileges with it, but 12 minutes was an empire in boarding time. By the time the audit chime finished its second cycle, Rook broke through the comm clutter, voice breathless and pitched too high. "Chief, civilian queue acknowledged receipt, but adjudicator node is filing emergency stay under War Precedent Statute 8-4. They're saying your contamination flag is technically valid but strategically abusive." "Tell them strategic abuse is my love language," Stella said, then winced at himself. "No, don't tell them that. Tell them line integrity still reads compromised, and armed entry remains a respiratory risk." Rook made a strangled sound that might have been a laugh if she hadn't been one panic spike from tears. "Copy. Also, Command wants to know why your panel access keeps reassigning permissions through Diagnostics Sandbox B? That sandbox was decommissioned 11 years ago." "Exactly," Stella said. "Nobody remembers to guard doors they've declared obsolete." He cut the channel and stood, knees cracking. Soraya had moved closer while he worked, silently, predatory grace constrained by injury. She stopped at arm's length, close enough that he could smell antiseptic, singed fur, and the faint resin note that clung to ducal ceremonial oils. Up close, her restraint rig looked worse. Elegant metal over brutal intent. Filigree shell around a lock core dense enough to jam medbots and injectors. "May I see the restraint?" he asked. "You may." She extended both wrists without theatrics. He took them carefully. Gloved fingers light on the metal housing, aware of claws inches from his sleeves and of how trust could vanish if he moved too fast. The lock pulsed a pale blue crest, then threw a warning glyph in Old Halen script. He didn't read the language, but coercive tech had a universal design grammar. Dual channels, sedative port, compliance feedback loop keyed to stress hormones. "This thing is monitoring your pulse," he said. "Spike's trigger dose?" "Yes. Also, if I exceed defined acceleration thresholds or strike force metrics." He looked up. "So, if Marines rush us and you defend yourself, it punishes you for it." "It reframes defense as instability," she said, calm as steel. "Protocol is very proud of that innovation." A hard knock slammed the hatch, followed by a shouted countdown from the corridor. They were testing his nerve, maybe waiting for legal cover, maybe hoping he would crack and open on his own. Stella ignored it and turned back to the restraint. "I can't break this without tools and a bench, but I might be able to blind one channel." "Why?" The question landed plain, unadorned. No noble posture, no command voice, just raw uncertainty inside authority. He answered, just as plain. "Because whoever designed this built it to make your body testify against you. I don't like that kind of engineering." Something in her shoulders eased by a measurable degree. Not relaxed, not safe. Less alone. He worked a microprobe into a maintenance seam along the cuff and felt for the secondary sensor braid. 2 tries failed. On the third, he found the line and pinched it with a ceramic clip from his kit. The housing flashed amber once, then returned to blue with one status icon gone. "Stress feedback partially masked," he said. "You'll still feel the lock, but sudden adrenaline spikes should stop autodosing for a while." Soraya inhaled sharply as if testing the claim against her own bloodstream. "You do that often? Disable aristocratic restraints in cargo holds?" "Only on Tuesdays." That earned a brief, startled huff from her, half laugh, half disbelief, and in the same motion the compartment felt less like a trap and more like a place where 2 people might improvise a way through. He released her wrists, and she did not pull away immediately. Her gaze held his. Direct now. No courtly veil. The feared counterpart from station rumor, feral Duchess, unstable fox bloodline, dangerous asset, resolved into a wounded strategist, choosing where to place one shard of trust in a ship full of people trained to process her, not hear her. "Chief Diaz," she said quietly, "if this escalates to formal declaration, I will require a technical witness with independent labor status. Your guild credentials qualify. If you accept, you become visible." "I became visible when I opened this door." "Visibility is not the same as named alignment." He thought of the retirement order, of civilian arbitration in polished shoes, and pretending old corridors no longer lived in his bones. He thought of the word property coming through the speaker with legal certainty. "Noted," he said. "We survive the next 10 minutes first." The speaker barked alive again, now with synthesized neutrality. Adjudicator Node Kelt had escalated. "Audit jurisdiction challenged. Temporary stay pending verification. Compartment occupants are instructed to submit biometric identity scans immediately." Soraya's ears flattened for one heartbeat, then lifted. "There. The frame contest begins." Stella keyed local channel and pitched his voice dry enough to sand paint. Node Kelt. Your stay request was filed 43 seconds ago. A court procedure requires neutral recorder assignment before mandatory scans in disputed custody. Even machine law school should cover that. A longer pause this time. Somewhere in the exchange, someone above Kelt was reading, checking, deciding whether to bluff harder or wait. Rook cut in at a whisper volume on a side channel. Chief, neutral recorder accepted. Civilian clerk from Dock Tribunal 3 is patching in. You actually pulled one. Don't sound so surprised. I'm not surprised, she said. I'm alarmed by how much you know about legal sabotage. Maintenance teaches creative literacy. He ended the channel and finally let himself lean against a crate for half a second. The metal was cold enough to bite through his sleeve. He welcomed it. Cold was information. Cold told him he was still in body, still in sequence, still working a solvable problem. Soraya studied him while he checked his scanner again. Your breathing ritual, she said. War origin? Yeah. It steadies your scent profile. Useful. He blinked. You can read that? I can read fear chemistry at 5 meters when my own restraint feed is not drugging me. A faint, tired irony entered her voice. At the moment you smell like solder, old coffee, and deliberate stubbornness. Deliberate stubbornness is the backbone of infrastructure. Then your species has an architectural advantage. The hatch boomed again, harder. Warning lights above the door flashed from blue to orange and back, signaling contested authority handshake between ship and corvette. Stella pushed off the crate and stepped to the center of the hold, where both cameras could see him. He lifted his hands from his sides, open, visible, non-threatening, and spoke toward the nearest lens. For the record, passenger in hold 9 remains under active triage. Armed entry denied until neutral recorder confirms status pathway. Any forced breach now constitutes endangerment during medical stabilization. A new voice arrived over speakers, this one civilian, breathy, overworked, very awake in the way of clerks dropped into disasters. Dock Tribunal 3 recorder Helen Vartesk present. This session is now logged. Occupant requests may proceed. Soraya stepped forward until she stood beside Stella in full camera frame. Even injured, she carried herself like orbit had to curve around her. She raised her bound wrists just enough for the crest to register, then lowered them again. No theatrics. Precision. Recorder Helen, she said, each syllable clipped and clear. I invoke line privilege as Soraya Val of Halen Verge, 3rd Signatory Duchy. I contest custodial transfer under Protocol 17 on grounds of non-consensual sedation, unlawful restraint architecture, and coercive matrimonial transport. The hold went very quiet, as if even the fans were listening. Adjudicator Node Kelt cut in fast, almost overlapping her final word. Identity claim, disputed pending hereditary seal verification. Soraya did not look at the speaker. She looked at Stella. Now comes your sarcastic line, Chief Diaz. Humans deploy those when cornered, yes? He stared at her for a fraction of a second, then barked a short laugh, despite the pressure squeezing his ribs. Fine. For the record, this is the worst retirement party I've ever attended, and I once got a farewell cupcake with a bolt in it. The clerk on the line made a sound halfway between a cough and a snort. Even Rook, somewhere beyond layers of hole and hierarchy, let out a choked laugh over open mic before muting herself too late. The tension did not disappear, but it changed shape. Not panic now. Momentum. Stella looked into the camera again and kept going, voice steady. Recorder Helene, add this. I can provide direct technical testimony that the restraint unit on Duchess Val includes stress-triggered sedative control channels inconsistent with voluntary protective custody. I request immediate forensic hold on all Protocol 17 hardware aboard attached corvette and cutter Kestrel 9. Helen answered instantly, clerk instincts locking onto actionable process. Request entered. Adjudicator response required within 60 seconds. Kelt replied with machine-perfect calm stretched over rising strain. Objection. Maintenance chief lacks standing. Soraya turned her head slightly, ears forward, predatory attention focusing like a blade. I grant him standing, she said. By ducal prerogative in emergency transit, Stella Diaz is designated technical ward and provisional protector for this proceeding. Stella felt the words land through the room like a pressure change. On command channels, someone swore softly. Someone else began talking too fast. The social geometry rotated in real time, old assumptions scraping against new legal vectors. Rook burst back in, unable to hide astonishment. Chief, you just got tagged in a ducal emergency register. Congratulations, I think. Also, Corvette Marines are standing down 2 steps from the hatch. They're awaiting fresh orders. Stella rubbed a hand over his jaw. Grease and cold and adrenaline all mixing into one exhausted grin no camera could quite read. Tell them to enjoy the pause, he said. I'm about to ask for their casualty ledger. The words left Stella's mouth and hardened the room. Through the open panel at his left, the cutter's old processors clicked under load, relays firing in dusty banks as if the ship itself had perked up at the scent of trouble. On speaker, the adjudicator's synthetic tone stayed smooth, but the gap before it answered lengthened by a fraction that read like strain. Protocol 17. Casualty data is sealed under dynastic confidentiality. Stella tipped his head toward the camera and kept his voice flat. Then, we can start with aggregate anonymized harm metrics tied to restraint model V-X-C. You know, the ones your hardware streams to maintenance for calibration drift. Sealed names, open numbers. Accord requires safety disclosure during contested custody. Recorder Helen inhaled audibly. Adjudicator, respond to scope-limited request. No one responded for 3 beats. In the silence, Soraya's breathing roughened once, then steadied. She stood beside him with her wrists lowered, ears forward, eyes fixed not on the lens, but on the tiny status icon floating over his slate, where the Corvette handshake jittered yellow-green-yellow. She spoke without looking away. They will stall until your audit loop burns out. Probably. You said 12 minutes. 11 now? He spared her a glance. You good to keep standing? I am functional. It was not the same as yes. He stepped half a pace closer so their shoulders nearly touched, enough to block the camera's direct view of the cuff housing while he thumbed open his medkit. Functional is a bureaucratic word, he murmured. I asked if you're good. Her jaw tightened. For the first time since he'd opened the door, the ducal mask slipped at the edges. My left side is numb below the rib line from restraint current. My vision doubles when I look at bright interfaces. If I stop speaking, it is not surrender. It is the sedative rebound. She swallowed, the movement small and hard. And I'm trying very carefully not to sleep while strangers decide who owns my transit rights. The sentence hit him harder than the alarms had, not because it was dramatic, but because it was precise. Sleep itself had become a custody risk. He kept his tone practical. Sit against the crate. I'll adjust light levels and oxygen flow. If I sit, cameras read weakness. If you fall, they read instability and weaponize it. Pick your optics. A tiny sound escaped her, bitter amusement stripped down to a breath. You argue like a dock worker advocate. I fix air pumps for aristocrats. It's adjacent. She lowered herself, controlled but slower than she wanted, back against a med crate with one knee bent. Stella moved instantly, not touching her until she gave a brief nod, then placed a folded thermal wrap beneath her shoulders to keep her off direct cold plating. He dimmed his collar lamp, rerouted one vent with 3 quick commands, and shifted the hold's airflow so the coolant haze drifted away from her face. "Recorder," he said aloud, making each action part of record. "Triage adjustment in progress due to documented sensory overload and restraint-induced neuropathy. No sedation administered by me." Helen answered, voice steadier now that procedure had handrails. "Logged." Outside the hatch, marine boots scraped backward in reluctant discipline. Someone on the Corvette cursed under their breath and forgot to mute. Good. They were no longer acting from one script. Soraya watched him work, eyes narrowed against the pain spike in her side. "You are narrating your care to the record. Transparency keeps people alive. Transparency gets people punished. Both can be true." The resulting silence between them was not empty. It carried old calculations, class lines, the smell of ionized dust and antiseptic, the brittle nearness of trust built under surveillance. When she spoke again, her voice dropped below camera range, meant for him alone. "I did not board your cutter because it was random." He slid a fresh bio patch into her reach. "I guessed. I read your service maintenance filings for 6 weeks. Her ears angled back in embarrassment that looked strange on someone introduced as a threat. "You were the only chief in this lane who logged restraint injuries as injuries rather than behavioral incidents. You filed 3 anonymous complaints on medbay dosing quotas. 2 were buried, 1 forced a review." Stella blinked at her. He had filed those from a borrowed terminal at 0300, convinced they vanished into bureaucratic compost. "You picked me because I annoyed paperwork." "I picked you because you described pain with mechanical accuracy and moral offense." Her mouth twitched once, then flattened. "And because you are difficult to intimidate without wasting resources." Against his will, a dry laugh escaped him. "That might be the nicest thing anyone said to me in uniform." Her gaze sharpened. "Do not romanticize this, Chief Diaz. I used you. I triggered my ducal emergency code on your hull because your command crew was young enough to freeze and your maintenance access was old enough to exploit. I noticed. And if you had chosen compliance, I would have marked you as hostile and sealed this hold against you." He absorbed that, nodding once. "Also noticed." For 3 heartbeats, she said nothing. Then the aristocratic precision cracked fully. "I am telling you because I am tired of lying in clean language. I was not merely escaping marriage transfer. I was escaping continuous assessment designed to produce legal incompetence. The sedation protocol made me forget words during hearings. The restraints logged panic as aggression. The reports wrote me as volatile, therefore transferable." Her throat worked around the next line. "By the 2nd month, I began rehearsing my own name before sleep, so I would still have it in the morning." Stella crouched to her level, forearms on his knees, keeping his hands visible and still. The hold hummed around them, blue audit lights painting hard angles along crate edges, while the station's legal machinery turned somewhere beyond steel like a distant storm. "You still have it," he said. "Tonight, yes. Tomorrow too." "That is not a promise you can make." "No, but it's one I can work for." On speaker, adjudicator Kelt returned with clipped precision. "Scope-limited harm metrics are non-responsive to present jurisdiction." Helene snapped back faster than Stella expected. "That is not an answer. Provide data or state refusal for the record." Kelt paused, then, "Refusal pending superior authority." There it was. Not denial. Refusal. Logged. Stella rose and reopened his panel, fingers moving through menus by memory. "Rook," he said into side channel, Need propulsion and medbay maintenance deltas for any 17 boarding over last 18 months. Strip names, keep timestamps, power draw, and sedative cartridge replacement counts. Rook answered on an exhale. That request is either genius or career arson. Both. Can you pull it? Already pulling. Also, Chief, 3 days ago we serviced a Corvette with 17 tags. Their medlockers burned through restraint cartridges at triple normal. He closed his eyes briefly. Send me raw logs and checksum. En route. Soraya had gone very still, listening. Triple normal, she repeated, each syllable careful. So, I was not singular. No, Stella said. You were never singular. They just kept you isolated. He expected her to harden again. Instead, she looked away toward the hold door, where blue light stuttered across scarred steel, and said in a voice gone thin from old exhaustion, There was a girl from Vest Quarter, not noble enough for headlines, who sat beside me during transit intake and asked whether she should pretend to faint because fainting made officers gentle for 2 minutes. I told her to conserve oxygen and count fan rotations. 2 days later, her file vanished from roster. Her claws flexed once against her cuff. I have been hearing that fan count in my head for months. The line reframed her more than titles had. Not predator, not runaway Duchess. A commander who had kept other women regulated through fear with whatever tools she had left. Counting, breath, observation. Stella reached for the scanner and angled it so only she could see the display. Fan rotation in this hold is 82 per minute on current load. We'll use that if the rebound hits. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Same every cycle. She met his eyes and gave a single, sharp nod. 9 minutes into the audit, Rook's packet arrived in a compressed burst. Stella dumped it into the diagnostic sandbox, checksum matched, and opened the graphs. Power spikes in med restraints, repeated cartridge swaps, environmental dampers toggled during custody transfer windows, anonymous, deniable, and devastating when stacked. Recorder Helen, he said, voice carrying, submitting comparative maintenance telemetry from 17 tagged Corvette operations. Aggregate only. Pattern indicates restraint sedative utilization significantly above declared medical thresholds. Helen's reply came almost instantly. Received. Marked. Exhibit 7. Kelt cut in. Sharper now. Telemetry interpretation requires certified adjudication. Great, Stella said. Adjudicate this. Your declared passive custody profile says low-intensity monitoring. Your own maintenance draw shows active behavioral suppression cycles. Either your paperwork is wrong or your practices are. No answer came, and the absence said more than argument would have. Soraya pushed herself upright using the crate edge, face pale beneath fur despite the vent adjustment. I can provide seal verification now, she said quietly. If I wait longer, the rebound may slur my diction. You sure? No. Proceed anyway. He respected the honesty more than any performance of certainty. Then we do it clean. He clipped a narrow fiber lead from the panel to his slate, then to the camera node, creating a direct low-latency channel so no intermediary could claim artifact corruption. He narrated each step into record. He requested Halen confirm chain integrity. Holland did. He asked Kelt whether Protocol 17 objected to authenticated lineage check under neutral oversight. Kelt said objection reserved, which legally meant they could not stop it without exposing procedural bad faith. Stella turned to Soraya. Your call. She inhaled on his count, held, exhaled, then lifted her bound wrists and touched the crest housing to the camera relay plate. The metal warmed with a soft chime. A fox crest sigil bloomed in hollow over the hold floor, elegant and ancient, followed by encrypted lineage vectors and a public key signature that rippled through every open channel. Rook swore softly in awe. Helene whispered, "Verification confirmed." Kelt tried once more. "Identity does not negate custody necessity." Soraya answered before Stella could, voice rough but unwavering. "Custody is not care when consent is erased." The statement landed like a hammer in a glass room. Stella moved immediately into the second half of his plan, competence replacing outrage before outrage could scatter him. He fed the new verification key into the audit core, linked it to Exhibit 7, and set an automated compare routine against 17's declared consent templates. Old ship, old law, old mechanic, and a very current abuse pattern. Sometimes that was enough. On-screen, progress bars crawled. He watched each one like pulse readings. 41%, 52, 60. The cutter's processors whined under the load, fans ramping up to a metallic roar that vibrated in his teeth. Soraya's breathing hitched. He heard it without looking and spoke low beside her. "Count with me. In for 4. She followed him, slower, but exact. Hold for 4. Her shoulders steadied. Out for 4. By the time the compare routine hit 88%, she was upright again. Not because pain had eased, but because control had returned. The result window flashed open with brutal simplicity. Consent records attached to 7 custody transfers contained checksum discontinuities and template duplicates generated from the same source packet. Different names, same consent fingerprint. Not clerical error. Fabrication. Stella sent the file to Helene, mirrored it to civilian Q, and locked a copy into the cutter's immutable maintenance archive, where deletion required physical destruction of 3 storage nodes and a signed demolition order. "Exhibit 8, he said, voice gone hard with focus. "Forensic comparison indicates non-unique consent artifacts across multiple detainee records. I request immediate suspension of all 17 transfer authority pending independent review." Helene's response shook. Request granted under emergency evidentiary safeguard. For the first time since he had turned the lock, Stella let himself breathe without forcing the count. The air still smelled of coolant, fir musk, old metal, and danger. But danger now had witnesses. Beside him, Soraya bowed her head once, formal and brief, then rested her forehead against his shoulder for the length of a single heartbeat in foxkin acceptance protocol before straightening again to face the cameras. This time, when she spoke, she sounded less like someone defending her own life and more like someone reopening a door for others. "Recorder," she said. "Add this directive under verified line authority. All physical restraint units and sedative cartridges aboard 17 vessels are to be impounded, analyzed, and cross-referenced to maintenance telemetry immediately. No sealed chain. Full civilian mirror." Helen answered. Firm now. Directive entered and distributed. Stella looked at the hatch, then back to the panel, already calculating the next failure point, because systems did not collapse gracefully, and he had learned to trust process only after it survived impact. But, for the moment, the hold remained theirs. The audit still live, and the machine that had called her property was finally being forced to show its wiring. Soraya did not step back after that brief contact. She stayed close enough that Stella could feel the residual tremor in her shoulders, the muscular aftershock of pain held in check by discipline and stubbornness. The hold lights remained audit blue, flattening color and turning the fur at her jawline silver at the edges. On every open channel, officers and clerks argued in clipped bursts, but inside the radius of their shared breathing count, there was a small pocket of order that belonged to neither rank nor bloodline. Stella kept one hand on the maintenance panel, and angled his body toward her, a practical shield against camera glare and corridor sightlines. He had spent years repairing systems that treated people as replaceable components. Standing there, shoulder to shoulder with a Duchess who had just used his name like a legal anchor, he felt the shape of a different duty settle into place. "Your pulse spiked when the verification cleared," he said quietly, glancing at the cuff telemetry now that one channel was masked. "Not fear spike. Adrenaline drop." Soraya gave a short nod, eyes still on the hatch. "Relief is physiologically expensive." "Yeah, comes with an invoice." A dry breath of humor touched her voice. "Your species should patent understatement." He reopened the medkit and held up a narrow electrolyte ampule. "No sedative, no neural dampers, just fluids and salts. You consent?" "I do." He snapped the seal, handed it over, and watched her drink in measured swallows, jaw tightening as sensation returned unevenly along her left side. She did not hide the pain from him now, and that transparency landed harder than any declaration. Trust in his world had usually looked like signatures and chain codes. Here, it looked like an aristocrat letting a dock-born mechanic witness the cost of staying upright. Rook cut through on side channel, voice lower than usual, trying to sound composed and mostly succeeding. "Chief, status from Central Q. Your exhibits propagated faster than expected. 2 advocacy blocks filed emergency amicus support in under 90 seconds. Also, my tactical board is now full of very senior names pretending they were always pro-transparency." Stella snorted. "Funny how principles bloom when feeds go public." Soraya lifted her chin toward his slate. "Put her on local." He patched Rook in. Soraya spoke with formal precision that still carried fatigue at the edges. "Ensign Rook, you held internal comm discipline under pressure. I acknowledge that publicly." Rook went silent for a beat. "Duchess, thank you. For record clarity, I also nearly fainted twice." "Noted," Soraya said. "Do not do it a third time." A strained laugh escaped Rook. "Copy." The exchange was small, almost absurd under the circumstances, and it eased something in Stella's chest that had been locked hard since he opened the door. Found family warmth was never sentimental on border cutters. It was forged from competence, sarcasm, and the shared refusal to abandon one another when systems went predatory. He checked the comper routine again, then closed the panel cover halfway to protect the bus lines. Soraya's cuff warning glyph flickered amber and back. He tapped it once with a gloved finger. "Rebound window's coming," he said. "Stay with the fan count. 82 per minute." She matched his cadence at once. "I remember." "Say it." "In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. He nodded. "Good." By the time the second audit cycle chimed, 4 minutes had passed since her verification, and the hold had transformed from improvised refuge into procedural battleground. Helen's clerk feed pinged with new acknowledgments from Dock Tribunal and 2 medical ethics boards, each stamped with urgency flags that forced routing priority. Stella forwarded chain checksums, then locked his wrist slate to manual authentication only. Soraya watched each movement with predatory focus, learning his habits in real time, then reached to the torn seam of her mantle and pulled free a thin internal cord braided with metallic thread. She wound it once around his wrist above the tool cuff and tied a compact knot with one hand. He looked down. "What's that for?" "Transit claim marker," she said. "In Halen law, temporary and revocable. It denotes recognized protective dependency during active dispute. If anyone boards and separates us, this compels immediate challenge hearing." Stella blinked. "You just tagged me with Fox legal fiber in front of 6 jurisdictions." In front of 9 now, her ears tilted toward the camera dome. And I did ask consent by implication. You did not withdraw your wrist. That was a fast implication. You adapt quickly. He tested the knot. Secure, light, warm from her hand. No jewel, no ceremony, just a practical strand hidden in a ripped mantle, offered without flourish. The bond signal did not arrive as romance or oath. It arrived as shared legal risk, made tangible. Stella lifted his wrist so the camera could capture it. For the record, he said, marker accepted. Helen spoke immediately. Keyboard clicks audible. Recorded. Mutual acknowledgement of transit dependency marker under contested custody clause. Soraya's breathing stuttered once as pain flared, and Stella shifted closer without comment until her shoulder touched his again. She let it happen. In another context, the contact would have read as a challenge. Here, it read as calibration. Two nervous systems sinking under load. You are aware, she murmured, that accepting this narrows your exit options. My exit options got narrow when your protocol called you cargo. Her eyes closed for one heartbeat, then reopened sharper. Then hear this clearly, Stella Diaz. I did not choose you because you were expendable. I chose you because you were the one person in this lane likely to see me as a person and still know how to reroute a failing oxygen manifold while being yelled at by aristocrats. He let out a short laugh that scraped with exhaustion. That's going on my union card. Do so. The channels crackled, then quieted as if the whole sector had inhaled. The hush lasted less than a second. It was enough for Stella to hear the old cutter's frame tick under thermal stress and to feel Soraya steady herself against him with deliberate, unashamed reliance. Dependency was no longer abstract. It had weight. It had heat through layered fabric. It had his name in her legal declaration and her cord on his wrist, and both of them knew neither gesture could be walked back without consequence. Conflict returned as a full system impact warning and a blinding wash of orange across every panel in Hold 9. The deck jolted under Stella's boots, hard enough to rattle tools in his belt, and a new klaxon replaced the audit chime with a harsh tritone he had heard only during combat-era drills. Rook shouted over open comm before anyone could sanitize the message. Chief. Kelt invoked wartime continuity powers through dormant defense accords. They're trying to supersede civilian review and force remote lockout on all non-combat compartments. Soraya swore under her breath in her own language, then switched to clipped trade tongue. That statute sunsetted after the armistice. Node says sunset applies only during declared peace corridors, Rook said. They just reclassified this lane as temporary security theater. Stella's jaw tightened. They turned a legal argument into a battlefield designation. Because they can, Soraya said, already moving despite pain. She rose from the crate, one hand braced on his forearm, the other lifting her bound wrists toward the panel. And because many judges still defer when they hear the word wartime. The speaker boomed with Kelt's synthesized authority, louder now, stripped of polite cadence. By emergency continuity directive, civilian mirror access is suspended. Occupants will submit to immediate retrieval. Non-compliance authorizes environmental suppression. Stella snapped to the panel and tore the fascia fully free, exposing 3 generations of retrofitted control architecture. Rook, confirm life support trunk status. Green but contested. Remote packet storm on your channel. Helen, are you still live? The clerk answered through static and packet loss. Live for now. They're contesting my recorder credentials at Central. Don't disconnect. If they kick you, say it aloud first. Soraya stepped past him and, with a speed that ignored her injury, keyed a ducal cipher sequence into his slate one-handed. New authentication threads bloomed across the display like branching frost. She did not ask permission. She took initiative and saved him 6 steps. "I just tunneled your audit feed through hereditary arbitration relays," she said. "They can jam civilian mirrors, not ducal succession channels, without triggering interhouse sanctions." Stella stared at the rerouted map, then gave her a fierce, tired grin. "You just outplayed a military adjudicator with nobility paperwork." "I was trained for predation in salons," she said. "Do not underestimate upholstery warfare." The humor lasted half a breath. The panel screamed as remote commands hammered his bus line. One relay popped with a sharp crack and the smell of burnt polymer. Stella shoved a ceramic shunt into place, rerouted command isolation through the sacrificial sandbox, and watched load percentages climb toward failure. 71, 78, 84. Rook came back, words tumbling. "Marines are moving again, but slower. They're getting conflicting orders from Corvette and Station Oversight. Also, dispatch just responded to your earlier hazard report. They denied fault and attached a 5-page form." Stella barked a laugh despite himself. Bureaucracy survives every apocalypse. "Do you want the form? Frame it." He cut the channel and opened the maintenance archive, digging for one file most officers ignored: decommissioned ledger for wartime continuity nodes on his hull class. If Kelt was exploiting dormant statutes, there was a chance they were also exploiting hardware that had never been fully removed, only flagged inactive. Old ships remembered every shortcut ever taken against them. He found it. Continuity Relay Cluster C, physically located 2 decks below Hold 9, decommissioned on paper, left electrically intact pending parts that never arrived. "Of course," he muttered. "They left the teeth in." Soraya leaned in, reading over his shoulder, breath warm and steady now by force of will. "Can you sever it remotely?" "Not cleanly, but I can trigger a compliance paradox." He patched Hill into local so the clerk could hear every word. "Recorder, I'm initiating a systems integrity challenge. Any node invoking continuity powers must pass current biosafety certification. This Hull's continuity relay is uncertified and flagged decommission pending. If Kelt keeps invoking it, they're relying on illegal hardware." Helen did not hesitate. Statement entered. Adjudicator, respond. Kelt answered with machine calm, gone thin at the edges. Certification status is administratively non-material during emergency execution. Soraya's ears went forward, predatory and precise. "Incorrect," she said into open channel. "Under revised accord, Annex 12, post-armistice emergency execution cannot rely on uncertified life support adjacent architecture. I co-sponsored that annex. I remember every comma." A burst of overlapping voices hit comms. Station council, 2 House legal aides, 1 furious Corvette officer, and someone from Central Audit demanding packet priority. External conflict no longer crashed only at their hatch. It flooded the whole network. Stella seized the moment. He executed the integrity challenge and mirrored the relay status to every channel still alive. Panels across Hold 9 flickered blue, white, blue. The tritone klaxon cut out mid-blare. For one suspended instant, the cutter sounded like a living thing, stunned into silence. Then, Helene's voice rang clear, amplified by fresh authority. "Emergency continuity directive has stayed pending hardware legality review. Civilian transparency mirror restored by order of Dock Tribunal Emergency Bench." Rook whooped over comm, then tried and failed to sound professional. "Chief, they just forced the Corvette to stand off 1 meter and retract breaching team. I repeat, Marines are backing off." Stella exhaled hard enough to shake, then caught himself on the panel edge. Soraya's hand closed over his wrist where her marker cord sat, grip firm, claws carefully sheathed. She did not thank him in ceremonial language. She did not need to. The hold still smelled of scorched polymer and coolant vapor. Alarms still waited to return. The legal war was far from over. But in that narrow slice of reclaimed process, their combined strengths had held against a system designed to split them apart. Outside the hatch, magnetic clamps disengaged with a deep metallic thud, and the sound traveled through the deck like the first honest answer either of them had heard all night. Magnetic clamps disengaged with a deep metallic thud, and the sound rolled through Hold 9 like a storm front passing. For the first time since he had opened the pressure door, Stella heard the cutter's baseline noises return in their proper order. Fan whine, coolant circulation, relay chatter, his own pulse settling out of combat rhythm. Blue audit lights still washed the crate stacks, but the orange war klaxon was gone, and that absence felt bigger than silence. Halen spoke first, voice steadier than before and carrying new procedural weight. All parties, this session remains active. Chain of custody actions begin now. Chief Diaz, Duchess Val, confirm your physical status for record. Stella keyed his mic. Conscious, ambulatory, mild smoke exposure, no critical injury. Soraya answered beside him, clipped and clear despite the strain in her flank. Conscious. Restraint neuropathy left side. Laceration controlled. No consent to military transfer. Logged, Hillen said. Unarmed civilian med team is en route with tribunal escort. Estimated arrival, 90 seconds. Rook cut in on a side channel, voice shaking with leftover adrenaline and stubborn professionalism. Chief, command wants to reclaim local control. Tribunal just denied them. Also, your retirement office keeps pinging confirmation requests like nothing happened. Stella looked at the retirement notice still glowing on his wrist, absurdly polite under emergency lighting, and almost laughed. Tell retirement I'm busy not dying. I already sent deferred due to live legal incident, Rook said. They replied with Form 7C. Of course they did. Soraya turned her head slightly, ears angled toward him. Your sarcasm has become structurally important. Put that in the audit findings. The hatch cycled with a softer hydraulic hiss this time. No breaching ram. No shouted countdown. 2 civilian medtechs entered first in pale gray masks, hands visible, followed by a tribunal marshal carrying a portable evidence vault and a body cam running open feed. Behind them stood Ensign Rook, pale, jaw set, refusing to stay on the bridge now that the immediate threat had dropped. Her eyes flicked to Stella, then to Soraya, then to the marker cord on his wrist, and whatever loaded question had sat there all night, resolved into a short, practical nod. I brought the forms, she said, lifting a data slate, and a clean checksum drive. Stella exhaled through his nose. You're promoted to favorite ensign. Low bar on this ship. Helen's voice came through the marshal's speaker. Begin evidence accounting. Stella moved into procedure because procedure was how he kept fear from writing bad code in his hands. He surrendered his handheld scanner first, identifying serial and data contents, thermal maps from conduit, C9 through cargo hold, restraint telemetry captures, environmental logs. The marshal sealed it in the vault. Next came the ceramic clip he had used to mask the stress feedback channel. He removed it from Soraya's cuff in full camera view, bagged it, and logged its exact placement and duration. He handed over the burnt relay fragment from the popped panel node, then the shunt bridging sandbox B, then a copy of Exhibit 7 and 8 on Rook's checksum drive with mirrored hashes to the Cutter Archive, Tribunal Q, and Civilian Oversight Board. Med patch roll, Helene prompted. Stella held up the depleted roll from his belt pouch. Used on visible flank wound with subject consent, no sedatives administered. The medtech verified residue profile, logged it, and sealed the spent backing strips as trace evidence. The electrolyte ampule shell followed. His insulated driver and restraint key were checked, noted as non-deployed for force, and returned to his belt under witness because they were duty tools, not contraband. Soraya lifted her bound wrists toward the marshal. Restraint Unit VXC, active, partially sensor masked by Chief Diaz. I request immediate forensic isolation. The medtech did not touch her without permission. Duchess, consent to removal in place? Consent granted. The lock came off with a bitter, high mechanical chirp. When the weight left her arms, her shoulders shook once in involuntary release, and she bared her teeth against the surge rather than make a sound. The unit went into a shield bag with its sedative cartridge still seated. Helene ordered direct transfer to civilian medical forensics with no military intermediary. Rook watched that bag like it contained a bomb. There's more, Stella said. He pointed to the open panel. Continuity Relay Cluster C still electrically live despite decommission flag. Logged as pending parts for 11 years. That hardware enabled the unlawful override attempt. The marshal recorded the exposed node, then sealed the panel with tribunal tape. Helen marked the decommission discrepancy for station infrastructure inquiry. Dispatch hazard report from Chief Diaz was previously denied fault, she added. That denial is now attached as Exhibit 9 for negligence review. Rook's mouth tightened. They denied it in under 20 seconds. Didn't even open diagnostics. Now they'll open everything, Stella said. As medtechs treated Soraya properly, consent prompts, clear explanations, no coercive tone, Stella finally answered the strange thread that had started the whole night like a splinter in his mind. He held up a tiny object the medtech had found tangled in Soraya's torn mantle, a snapped ceremonial earring clasp, sharp at one edge. That scratching in the conduit, he said quietly. This was hitting ceramic lining when she crawled the coolant run. Soraya gave a dry, exhausted breath that almost passed for amusement. I lost the clasp at Junction C11. I regretted it instantly when I heard your alarm cadence change. Diagnostic map said nothing alive could fit in that run. I was heavily motivated. Rook stared at the clasp, then at Soraya. You crossed 3 baffles through coolant frost with that wound? Soraya's ears dipped. I have made less rational decisions under protocol pressure. The loaded look Rook had carried all shift sharpened, then broke open into honesty. My sister washed out of cadet medical after a 17 transport rotation, said she couldn't tolerate compliance architecture. Never got details. I should have pushed harder. She swallowed. I didn't. Soraya met her gaze without rank theater. Push now. Rook nodded once. I am. By first shift dawn, the cutter sat docked under tribunal seal instead of military impound, and Hold 9 smelled less like panic and more like antiseptic and hot station coffee from paper cups nobody wanted but everyone drank. Helene remained on remote line through the entire transfer, then read formal outcomes in a voice hoarse from hours of non-stop record. Emergency bench ruling. Seizure order voided. Custodial protocol. 17. Suspended sector-wide pending full review. Autonomous adjudicator chain Kelt quarantined and placed under arrest authority. All associated restraint hardware impounded. Named detainees across prior transfers are to receive independent welfare checks within 12 hours. No one cheered. Relief in that room was too tired for celebration. It arrived as shoulders dropping, as unclenched hands, as Stella realizing he could feel the deck's warmth again through his boots. At the dockside tribunal annex, under white lights and 2 clean walls, the final declarations were signed in person. Stella submitted his complete maintenance archive, including the old anonymous dosing complaints he had assumed were buried. Helene attached proof that 2 had been suppressed by automated triage, and 1 had triggered a review, then been closed without field audit. Not abandoned anymore. Accounted for. Soraya entered her statement without euphemism. She named the sedation schedule, the restraint response loops, the coerced marriage transport terms, and the missing consent records. She also named the Vesk quarter girl and requested immediate trace. The clerk did not promise outcome she couldn't guarantee. She promised the search would be opened and logged publicly, and she stamped it where cameras could see. When the formal record closed, Soraya removed a signet ring from an inner pocket of her field mantle, old gold worn smooth at the edges. She placed it in Stella's gloved palm exactly as witnesses watched, then folded his fingers over it. Halen Emergency Register requires reciprocal token for standing conversion, she said. This grants you legal voice inside Reform Convoy systems and my household technical command if you accept. Stella looked from the ring to her face. If I accept, retirement arbitration is gone. Not gone, she said. Replaced by work that matters. He turned to the retirement terminal on the wall, opened the pending order, and selected Decline Transfer in full view of the clerk. Then replace it. Rook made a sound between a laugh and a disbelieving groan. You just rejected a quiet life for more alarms. Quiet was never in stock. Final thread work followed because he refused to leave loose wiring. He filed the 5-page Form 7C with 1 line attached. Hazard denial contradicted by tribunal exhibits, reopen and retrain dispatch triage. Dispatch acknowledged receipt this time with human signature and mandatory review code. He turned in the borrowed terminal credentials used for anonymous reports. He reclaimed his personal tools from evidence return, minus the bagged shunt and clip, retained for trial. The snapped ear-ring clasp was offered back. Soraya chose to keep it in evidence until all proceedings ended, then asked the clerk to note it as origin artifact from conduit entry, not trash. At dock lock 3, dawn light from the station's ring windows cut long pale bands across the gangway. The hydraulic lock disengaged with a clean, rounded thunk, the sound of safety, not capture. Workers in patched jackets moved cargo in disciplined silence, while tribunal marshals escorted sealed crates of restraint hardware toward civilian forensics. No one saluted Stella. Several nodded, which meant more. Soraya stood at the gangway threshold in a fresh medical wrap over her side and a plain convoy coat that hid most ducal insignia. She was still dangerous in the way storms were dangerous, but now the danger had direction. She held out a data slate. Civilian commission contract, she said. Chief Systems Officer, Reform Convoy Vol. Independent labor protections included. You may negotiate clauses. I expect you to. He scanned quickly, found the protections real, found Rook's name listed for optional transfer liaison, found Helen's office named as oversight contact. External calls answered. Reports looped back. Nothing left, dangling except the future itself. He signed. Soraya's ears lifted, subtle and unguarded. Welcome aboard, Chief Diaz. He slipped the signet into a secure pocket, adjusted the tool belt that had outlasted 2 wars and 1 retirement order, and stepped onto the gangway beside her. Rook fell in behind them carrying a crate of return diagnostics, muttering about paperwork density and coffee deficits. Ahead, the convoy air smelled of ozone, machine oil, and the sharp, clean edge of new paint over old metal. They walked into it together, not anonymous and not alone.